Welcome, everyone, to our Sarasota Colloquium on Tuesday, May 21st. Thank you all for being here this evening. And as you come in, if you could please remember to mute your microphones. Our format for Colloquium is somewhat informal, so if you have a question or feedback as we go through our presentation this evening, please drop your comments in the chat. And let's just make sure the chat is working. So if you could tell us where you are in the world, if you would just type into the chat your location. We're delighted to have our university president, Dr. Michael Levins, joining us this evening all the way from England, and our Sarasota University registrar and admissions coordinator, Ellen Lastinger, is here as well. Thank you both for being here this evening. I'd like to just start off by sharing some really exciting news with our audience this evening. We have launched our bachelor's completion program. Our bachelor's completion program started April 30th of this year. And what makes our bachelor's completion program unique is that our students start our program with 60 credits of foundational work already completed, and that may include credit for prior learning and or prior work experience. If you have earned credit at another university, regardless of the age of those credits, we encourage you to apply so that we can consider your prior work and see if we can't help you get started on that track to a bachelor's degree completion. Our bachelor's degree does culminate in a bachelor's of science degree in Montessori education. And I know everyone here already knows that Sarasota University is the Montessori University. We're very proud to be offering a bachelor's degree in Montessori education, as well as a Master's of Art in Montessori Leadership and a Master's of Arts degree in Montessori Education. So everything we do is based on the pedagogy, the philosophies of Dr. Maria Montessori, and we infuse that with strengths-based philosophy. So our goal is to help you on your journey to find and excel at your cosmic task. And we hope that if you have any questions, you will reach out to us. Please go to sarasotauniversity.edu on our website, or you may email Ellen at info@sarasotauniversity.edu. And we have a little more information to share with you at the end of our colloquium today, and that is information regarding our dual enrollment or with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. I get so excited about it, I stumble over my words, but we have a dual enrollment program and work on your Montessori credential and a degree plan at the same time. You can compress that amount of time spent working on your degree and save money by doing a dual enrollment. And we'll share a little.
Is Lindsay frozen for everybody? Okay. Lindsay's frozen.
What did I do?
You got me. Okay. Well, we will share a little bit with you about our new dual enrollment program at the end of Miss Susan's presentation. So I'm going to text Lindsay and let her know she is frozen on screen. At least it's not too compromising a a face or anything, and we'll go ahead and let Suzanne begin. You're muted, Suzanne.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Very good. All right. That's not the slide I wanted. Well, good evening, everybody. I am super excited about the opportunity to share with you today. Lindsay and I have gotten to know each other through some of our work in Texas education and leadership circles. And I really kind of consider myself, I've been a kind of a lifelong educator, teacher, school leader, et cetera. I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm kind of a generative AI hobbyist is probably the best way to describe myself. You are getting a former first grade teacher who has been reading voraciously everything I can possibly find on generative AI. One of the things I'm in the habit of doing, though, is gut checking the things that I put in these presentations with people who actually have technology backgrounds, because I have a little bit of imposter syndrome about them. But I feel like one of the things that I've been able to do in some of these presentations that I've designed is translate all of the almost foreign language tech speak into normal people speak, educators speak. And so that's really what I hope to do tonight. I did go back and watch Dana Anderson's presentation that you guys heard last month in the Colloquium, and that was really helpful for me too. Every time I listen to anybody speak, I learned something new. And one of the things that I noticed about her presentation is she is very much a Montessorian. And so she had sort of that Montessori lens on the presentation. As you can kind of see from my background, I have an early childhood degree, but I did not specialize in Montessori education. I was a first grade teacher, pre-K teacher, and then fairly early in my career, worked in curriculum development. Most recently, I left Austin ISD as the executive director of curriculum and instruction. And now I work for the company that you saw, the little logo on the slide, called GTS Technology Solutions. It's a technology services provider in the Austin area, but I get to be what's called their education strategist, which means that I help connect them with K-12 clients across Texas, but I also am really there to be sort of the voice of emerging technologies, particularly as it relates to education. And so it's the best job in the world because I get to stay connected to all the things that have been a part of my career over the years. And I get to do interesting things like this sort of on behalf of our company as a kind of a free service. So you notice if you look on down the row on that left-hand column of pieces of my career that I really consider Gen AI learner. One of the most interesting titles, if you will, that I have been involved with. But technically, I work for GTS, and technically, I've also started an LLC recently called Connected Learning Community, and I'll share more about that later. So what I'd like us to do, and I'm going to make sure that I'll be able to see the chat on my screen as well, because I think it's super important to for us to get to know each other a little bit in this room. And so if you could open your chat and give us sort of a fist to five, 1 to 5 on your AI knowledge, or just kind of your self-evaluated AI knowledge. 1 is like very beginner, and like I've heard about it, but it terrifies me and I'm pretending it'll go away. That's kind of a 1. And then a 5 is, I just did a presentation last week on Gen AI, and I'm really curious what kind of information we'll get tonight in this Sarasota meeting. So if I could just see a few in there, that would be really helpful to me. Okay, thanks. William and Rosario. Good. Okay. All right. A little bit of everything. I don't see anything above a 3. So either you're being modest or we have some space to hopefully learn some new things tonight. And again, I have the slides that I have sort of rearranged for tonight's presentation are a part of a probably 150 slide presentation that I have developed through my role at GTS, but I've been presenting this content to school district leaders across Texas and then giving them the slides to customize and use with their own school populations for free. Because right now I feel like the most important thing we as educators can do is learn as much as we can, as fast as we can, because this technology is going to have a great impact on what our graduates are going to need to know and be able to do in their chosen fields. And so that's kind of the what you'll be seeing. I've obviously modified that down and pared it down for our audience tonight, but I'm happy to share more of these slides and resources if you have an inclination afterward. All right, so thank you for playing along in the chat. What questions do you have? I'd also like to open up the chat for you with regard to that, because some of you may have come in with some wonderings or some concerns. So I would love to just sort of hear from you. If you had to ask me one question tonight about generative AI, as it pertains to society, or as it pertains to higher education, or as it pertains to K-12 education, what would that be? I'm just going to watch the chat for a minute and see what you guys can toss in there. There's not a wrong answer. And I would just really be curious to know what, even if it's just a word, it as meaning like an area that you're most interested in, because I can spend more time or less time on certain parts of the presentation based on the things that you tell me that you might be most interested in. How do I know any AI information is true? Thank you. And you go by Bill, don't you, Dr. Summers? Is that right? I think I've met you before on a call, but I just want to be sure. Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. That's a great question. And I wish I could say that everything you hear that's spit out by AI is true and that there's an easy detection system. I wish I could say that. Unfortunately, I can't, but I do know a little bit about some of the things that are emerging. Rosario, what is the role of AI in the early childhood education programs? I am so glad you asked that too. And I have some opinions about that. I'll share as we get on through it. Any other questions or wonderings in the chat? Well, I'm gonna close out my chat right now, but if somebody's put something else in there, oh wait, how to find a balance of using AI in the secondary classroom. Thank you, Jenna. That's a great question too. All right, I think that's a great start for us tonight. And I'm gonna just jump right on in. One thing that I was gonna kind of position as a question to frame our conversation tonight is, how might Gen AI's capabilities interact with Montessori educational principles, right? So I mentioned that I had a degree in early childhood, and with an early childhood education degree, you have to study lots of different theorists and models for education. So I know enough to be dangerous about Montessori education, and I'm really curious if you, as Montessori specialists, have opinions thus far on the way of Gen AI's capabilities interact with some of the work you do in Montessori education. I'm not going to ask you to come off of mute right now or necessarily to put in chat right now, but I would love for that question to be sort of in the back of your mind as we go through tonight's learning. All right. Okay, so the content that I have to share tonight is really sort of designed according to 3 modules. The 101 module is kind of like, what is it? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time here based on the 1s, 2s, and 3s that I saw in the chat just a minute ago. But I'm not going to go into deep detail because I really think probably the more interesting conversation tonight comes around in module 301, which is really sort of what sort of applications there are now in the world of generative AI technology. And I'm calling that the good, the bad, and the interesting. I'm also going to show you a couple of things in generative AI 201. If we were spending more time together, we would all open up our own ChatGPT window or Gemini app, and we would play around with it for a bit. I'm going to skim over that a little bit and sort of assume that you'll do some personal exploration. But you'll see the presentation this evening kind of broken out like this. So one of the things that is a limitation about anyone's presentation on generative AI right now is the fact that, for instance, tonight, which is May the 21st, I believe, or 22nd, for 21st, sorry, I had to look at my phone. We might as well just put a big timestamp on tonight's presentation, because tomorrow and the next day and the next day, some of the things that I share with you tonight might be outdated. I've started presenting this material back on November 30th was the first time I gave a presentation like this. And by the time I revisited it and gave another version of it in January, I had to change about half of the content. The technology and the applications and the resources available are changing that quickly. So grain of salt required. So we're going to jump into 101, and that is sort of the basic language, common language and definitions. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the case for lifelong learnings. I would bet if we surveyed many of the people on the call, everybody on the call would either be aspiring toward or have one of these particular degrees or credentials in the field of education. Can I get some head nods? Would that be pretty safe bet, right? All right. I'm curious to know, and I'll look in the chat to see if anybody raises their hand or says that they do, whether anybody has degrees or training in these fields that are shown on the right-hand side of your screen. Computer, technology, AI, data science, that sort of thing. Do we have anybody in the room right now? I see that we have 16 participants. Does anybody have one of those degrees? All right. I do not either. And if you were on the call right when we first began tonight, you might have heard me say that I really am kind of an AI hobbyist in the sense that I've got several of the degrees and credentials on the left-hand side of the screen, but most people, even most of those people who I've found to be prolifically writing and learning about Gen AI, don't have a formal credential for it because it's moving so quickly. So I see that as a little bit scary, but also a great encourager to those of you who might feel like you're kind of behind or late to the game. There's no behind or late to the game with this. It really is learn as much as you can, as fast as you can, and experiment with it, because I feel like the more the field of education and really the citizenry of the United States can be literate around the technology, the safer we have the potential to be. And just to give you an idea of how quickly things are changing, November 30th of 2022 is the birthday of ChatGPT. So it's been around now for roughly 18 months. And that is not very long, but if you look on the right-hand side and see how quickly this technology was adopted in comparison to all of these other things that are pretty ubiquitous in terms of technology tools that we use, ChatGPT took 5 days to reach 1 million users. And I can only speculate how many users they have now. But I feel like that's an important consideration. And so one of the things that is an outgrowth of that rapid sort of change in adoption, and this is actually kind of an air quotes old report. It was dated the Future of Jobs report in 2020. But if you look at the jobs that are growing in demand versus the jobs that are decreasing in demand, there's some pretty dramatic changes that are already starting to happen. And a lot of that, we can't blame all of this on generative AI sort of replacement of positions just yet, because this was dated, like I said, in 2020. But essentially things that can be automated are starting to already have an impact on the types of positions that are available in different career fields. And so the question I would pose for the group right now, and this is something for you to just sort of mull as we think through this, is what role might generative AI be playing or continue to play or could further play in some of these changes. One example, when I left Austin ISD as an education curriculum leader, I went to work briefly for Dell before I was laid off, along with about 10% of the company recently. And one of the things that I've heard that is happening in that organization right now is that they are using Gen AI to automate a lot of their inside sales capabilities. Well, there used to be a very large army of people behind the scenes that were helping to do the inside sales work at the company. And I'm not trying to say that those roles are or are not compromised right now, but I'm seeing some pretty rapid changes already because of the capability to interact as a human, which we're just going to pause and be freaked out about that sentence for just a minute. But there are definitely changes in the workforce that are being brought about by this. And so one of the things that I have had to really sit back and reflect on as an educator is, what are the skills that I need as an educator and that my students need as part of the experience I provide for them? What are the skills that are kind of AI proof in a way? And one of the things that you'll hear a lot of the deep thinkers talk about is how critically important critical thinking is and media literacy is. And those are things that are not necessarily easy and straightforward to teach, and often not even a part of formal curriculi. But I would argue that that might be one way to begin making our jobs safe and preparing for the future that we are having a hard time predicting. This is one of my favorite quotes from last summer in the Harvard Business Review. It said, AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI. And so, for example, I have two daughters that recently graduated from college. One has a business degree and one has an engineering degree. And of course, they don't like to hear their mom talk about, what they should or shouldn't do. But I've been trying to beat this quote into their heads about how important it is to become a learner and to develop some skills in this career field, because of the way in which it's going to impact every field before too long. All right, so I'm going to begin with a few common definitions here. One is that artificial intelligence, as I think Dana pointed out last week, has been around for a long time. I want to say in 1956 was the first convening of a group of professionals that got together and started trying to figure out what to call the potential capabilities of computers to think like humans. And they came up with this term, artificial intelligence. And there have been types of machine learning and artificial intelligence over the years. But I want to point out that the big distinction that separates why we're talking about this all the time now versus 2 years ago when it was just kind of in the background is that on November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was released, that was the first time a tool had been released to the public that could generate conversation and simulate intelligence in a way that produced new information. And so that's the counterpart of the definition that you see here. Generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that uses algorithms to produce new information in the form of images, text, etc. And so that's what has been causing all the fuss over the last year and a half. There are different types of AI, and I actually looked at what Dana said last week and kind of compared. We frame ours a little bit differently, but reactive AI is one in which a tool responds to specific inputs or situations without necessarily learning from past experiences. Such as a Roomba. Anybody with a Roomba in here? Roombas are pretty smart, but they don't necessarily produce new information. Okay, they're not generative. All right, predictive AI, Netflix is a perfect example of this. They analyze your historical data and predict that you might want to watch Bridgerton or Emily in Paris or any of the other things that I'd be too embarrassed to say out loud that I've actually binge watched on those shows. They're a little bit too good at predicting what I might want to watch, right? That's predictive AI. And then we get to generative AI, and that is tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard or all of the, every time I replace the names of these, somebody new comes up with a different one. But it's producing new information. And they are based on large language models. That's a term. If we had to have a vocabulary quiz at the end of this, LLM, a large language model, would be one of those vocabulary terms. And applications like ChatGPT are built on them. I could spend more time on this, but I'm going to accelerate just a little bit, because to me, this little kindergarten version diagram that I drew and showed to my techie friends helps me to understand what an LLM is in a way that I can apply that knowledge to new settings. So we've got the internet, right? That's pretty common to us. It wouldn't have been common to us 30 years ago, but it's common to us now. And then we have large language models that are built on about 1% of the data on the internet. A lot of people think that it's like the whole internet. It's not the whole internet. It's trained on a sliver of information that has been retrieved or archived. And there's actually some lawsuits about that because nobody really gave their permission for that. But that's another presentation entirely. But large language models are built upon the internet. And then generative AI uses the LLMs to create multiple uses, such as ChatGPT or other ways in which to produce or generate new content. All right, that's a very kindergarten definition. And the other thing that's important, I feel really proud of myself that I'm one of the few people in America that I think can tell you what GPT stands for. And that is, it is a generative pre-trained transformer. And when you think about those three initials and the acronym that stands for, it makes sense. It is a generative, pre-trained, on a sliver of the internet, transformer to create new content. All right, so we've just had like Gen AI 101 essentially, and we're going to fly through a little bit more. But essentially, this is a sampling of the tools. I am not going to go into depth on them, but if you just ask ChatGPT or ask Gemini to itemize the most recent and interesting Gen AI examples, you can get your own information there. But I am going to read you this quote because it's from the U.S. Department of Education, and it to me was actually worthy to put in every single module of this content that I put together. Roberto Rodriguez, Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at U.S. Department of Ed, said, "I've had conversations with some educators who have said, well, I don't quite know what to make of AI. I'm not well prepared to really address it. So I'm going to sit this one out and we'll see what comes next." And this is not one of those that you sit out. Your kids aren't sitting it out. Their lives aren't sitting it out. And in fact, you're going to disadvantage students and create greater inequities by trying to sit AI out. So that's a heavy quote. Especially for people who are, frankly, if you're an educator, you might be a little tired of the rapid, fast pace of change and the multiple hundred dozen things that come across your inbox and your radar all the time. It's hard to decide where to place your focus. But what I'm here to do today is to kind of well, I was going to say sort of shake us into some consciousness or blow our minds a little bit, especially when I get into 301, about some of the things that are awaiting us and awaiting our students in the future that we will be disadvantaging our students if we aren't aware of and begin to take into account as we work in the field of education. All right, so a couple of quick important clarifications. Is generative AI information accurate? Yes and no. One of the things that it does is it hallucinates, right? There are lots of definitions of hallucinate, some of which aren't appropriate for a university colloquium. However, hallucination in the context of generative AI is where generative AI or the LLM creates information out of thin air and pretends that it was accurate. right? Basically, I heard one of my favorite speakers recently say, you want to put this into more common vernacular, it BS's. When it doesn't know something, it BS's. And there are people in the field of education and otherwise that have been BSing their way through things for a long time. We just now have an ability to prove and pin a name to it for generative AI. And that's something to be really leery of, especially as we educate students. One quick example from my experience, I recently am the kind of nerd who had to give a presentation and I wanted to quote John Dewey. And I was kind of lazy that day. And so I went into ChatGPT and I said, this is my topic. I would love it if you could give me 3 or 4 John Dewey quotes from which to choose that I can cite in my presentation. 2 seconds later, I've got some beautiful John Dewey quotes. And one of them didn't look familiar. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to check my work. And I cut and pasted them into a Google search bar. And 3 of them were very clearly his quotes because there were multiple references to them in other respectable publications. One of them had 0 citations linked to it. And so it was clearly a hallucination. So I learned that lesson personally. And I also got really scared that day because your typical 16-year-old who is using this for nefarious purposes, trying to quickly turn in a paper to their high school English teacher, is often not going to be quite so responsible with their fact checking. And so that's a really important thing. And I think that the fact that Cambridge Dictionary chose hallucinate, the 2024 version of hallucinate, as its word of the year shows that this is an important part of the vernacular that we need to know. Can Gen AI information be trusted? Also, yes and no. See also the word hallucinate, right? I actually asked it, do LLMs contain biased information? And I'm not going to go to the trouble to share with you this entire video, but it told me, yes, it does. And so I made a little screenshot of that and kind of showed you the conversation I was having with ChatGPT about the types of biases. This is only getting worse. But if you think about it, ChatGPT or generative AI in general is a mirror of what was in the internet. Is the internet biased? Yes, right? So if civilization is biased and if ChatGPT and the LLMs are a mirror of civilization, they will also be biased. And that even just very recently, I'm not going to go into it tonight because it's a hot mess and it's a political hot potato, but there were several examples very recently where some very offensive images were created by AI tools, clearly uninformed, clearly biased. And it is a sticky wicket that we can't solve probably from where we sit, but we need to be very well aware of it. All right, is Gen AI really that smart? Unfortunately, yes, 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 it really is. These are a few of the tests. I'm particularly a fan of the fact that it passed the introductory sommelier exam, so it can pick out some good wine for us. But if you look up there, it's definitely, and these are the older versions. This is a stat from like 6 months ago. So the tools are continuing to evolve. So I don't think we have to worry about how smart they are. I think we need to worry about how 100% accurate they are if we have to pick our worry. Common uses across multiple different examples. One of my friends who's a real estate agent, and he's thrilled. He doesn't ever have to write another description for a Zillow post ever again in his life because he just plugs in the particulars into ChatGPT and it spits out a beautiful piece of prose. It's amazing the way in which it's already started to simplify a lot of the things in our world. And these are just a couple of examples. My sound was not working. I'm going to try this, but I'm 99% sure it's not going to work for you. So Ellen, I can see your face. If by chance this works and you can hear her when I push play, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to skip on past this.
We can't really hear the words. We just heard a little noise from it.
Oh, you did? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and that's okay. We'll go ahead and skip her. Essentially, the story behind this is fascinating. It was when I worked at Dell and we brought together the city manager, the superintendent, the regional service center director, I think the homeless outreach director, all kinds of people who were involved with civic government in Amarillo, which actually has the largest number of languages spoken per capita in all of Texas, which really surprised me. And they were trying to figure out a way for their city government interface, their website, to be able to interact with people who spoke way more languages than they would ever be able to have on staff as a translator. And so they worked with Dell and some other people behind the scenes, and they built a digital human who now greets folks when they join their website, and you can pick any language you want, and she will direct you to all of the city services, from billing to library hours to street construction to trash collection to you name it. And they have used this as a tool across their city to simplify and unite, really, the cultures that they have across their city, which I found to be so fascinating. And I've actually seen a similar application of this in a school district in Texas, where the chief technology officer told me, he said, we used to onboard teachers in August, pretty much routinely. And he was like, now we have so many open positions and we're hiring teachers every month of the year that to do a new teacher orientation every month was about to kill us. So they entered all of their orientation, staff onboarding information into a chatbot and have created an online digital human orientation system for their newly hired teachers, right? Like, does that just make your head kind of explode a little bit? It did me. And so that's just one set of examples about the way in which these tools are operating. The news, I'm not even going to go into this right now because we'll get into it a little bit more in Module 301. One of the things that is important to note is that there is some guidance from the government, but very little. I reside in Texas. We have a committee studying it right now, but the technology has far outpaced our ability to put guidelines in place and legislate it. So that's all I can say about that right now. We cannot ignore it. The genie is out of the bottle. One thing I would tell you is both an encouragement and a bit of a caution is I think these three images have a whole lot to do with each other. Back in the 70s, the calculator was terrifying. We can't not teach, we can't let kids use calculators because they'll never know how to do math, right? Raise your hand if you're old enough to relate to that statement, right? Okay. When I got my master's degree in the late 90s, the World Wide Web was just coming on board in the universe. And I am probably one of the last master's students who actually had to go to the stacks and the microfiche in the university to do my research, right? The World Wide Web changed all of that. The internet did, right? And now we have this new thing, right? We have generative AI. I would say that at first glance, the calculator and the internet were probably very terrifying. And there are some that are terrified of what Gen AI is going to mean for society. I think there will be some good things that it means. And I think that I know that there will be some significant changes that we can't yet predict. So anywho, wanted to kind of give you like a mental hook to put that, to put on that. Now I'm going to jump into module 201 and 301. 201 is going to be very truncated, and 301 here in just a minute, but I am going to also look at the chat. And so if anybody has anything that is on their mind in the chat, that is a reflection of what you've heard so far, I would love to sort of multitask and see what you're thinking, like what your brain is doing behind the scenes, because I hate that this is kind of a lecture. I'd really like us to be in the room so that I could watch your heads explode in person. But if you have something that's like either really blowing your mind or nagging at you, or that you just can't not ask right now, I'm not going to ask you to come off mute, because we could go down a rabbit hole really quickly and not get to some of the other things that I want to make sure I share tonight. But I would love to see what some of your thoughts are. And Ellen, I want to ask you a quick question too, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat What is my end time tonight? I was going to ask Lindsay about that before she froze. I wanted to confirm that I don't go like be that professor who goes 2 hours past the end time that everybody's like rolling their eyes about and talks about later. So I can make this as long or as short as we need it to be based upon the end time that you give me.
Okay, the end time is 8. However, Lindsay wanted to say a few words before then, or
Okay.
if Lindsay's not here. So I would say wrap it up like by 5 till 8.
Okay. Okay. I can do that.
Thank you, Ellen. I agree. Suzanne, there's so much to cover. We're going to have to invite you back.
Well, and actually, you know what I would like to do now that I know that I have until 8, I don't have to fly quite so quickly. Would it be okay if I like let people chime in and do a little bit of round the room relating to the end of module 101 that we've just finished?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen then for just a minute. I see that we have about 21 people in the room, and now that I'm not sharing my screen, I can see your faces. I've been able to see Dr. Levins and Ellen, and I think Margie sometimes, but the rest of you I haven't gotten to see. So I'm looking at your faces, and I'm curious to know what some of your reflections, ahas, worries are just so far in hearing what you've heard about what I've shared. Holly, I see your hand up. Thank you. What would you like to share?
Well, I was just having this conversation with my son.
Oh, I can barely hear you. Can you guys hear her?
I could barely hear her. I heard you say, Holly, you were just having a conversation with your son, but it was so faint.
Let's see. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's much better.
Okay. Well, I was just having this conversation with my son about how there's all these new like degree programs in college about engineering and AI and how they can, you can create algorithms to replace like some of the very repetitive jobs in like a factory and that kind of thing. So I think I went to visit Georgia Tech with my daughter because that's one of the schools where she's interested in. They were talking about how they have this new program about AI and how exciting it is, and they're making robots and all this stuff. And I think there is some very scary, but also exciting kind of opportunities for kids. And I think it's important that they have access to like the foundation and things like coding and advanced math and all these things so that they can take advantage of these opportunities that are available now.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. I'm so glad you brought that up. And one of the things that I've really been chewing on as well, because I am not a coder. I don't speak the language of code. I admire people that do, and I live with, well, I don't live with her anymore, but I have a daughter that does as well. And she gets a little testy about this when we talk about it, because one of the things that is kind of a fact now is that AI can code, and it does so pretty effortlessly. And so there's a lot of conversation about whether or not we should be prioritizing teaching coding to students in the same way that we have been, because we know that it can code often better than humans because of the error factor. Now, does that mean nobody needs to know how to code? It does not mean that, because how will we ever be able to check it or, debug something that it does incorrectly? However, one of the things I experienced as a curriculum director is that oftentimes advanced math classes and coding classes were kind of insurmountable obstacles for some students because they didn't have a strong math background, which prevented them from being able to get into computer science fields and things like that. And so one of the things that has K-12 educators kind of scratching their heads right now is, to what degree are those sort of traditional obstacles, like calculus and statistics and other things like that, to what degree are those things really necessary before kids really get in and become AI specialists? There are a lot of free courses right now in Coursera and Google and other places that can prepare students with credentials that are AI geared, but that require almost none of that other schooling. I'm not advocating for missing that other schooling, especially as I talk with a university audience. However, I do think those multiple pathways and some of the new capabilities have to sort of shake our traditional notions loose a little bit. And that's tricky. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm not advocating for it. I'm not on one side of the fence or the other, but I hadn't really thought about it until just about the last month or two. Lisa?
Suzanne?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I wanted to point out that Lisa had her hand up, and we have a couple of comments in the chat.
Perfect.
Hey there. So a couple things. I hadn't thought of the idea. I really am interested in AI. I've been interested in a while and following somewhat. I'm really liking the idea of the onboarding that you were talking about. We've really been struggling, as everybody has, of course, with rapid turnover in teachers, and I can really see that would be a very useful tool for consistency. Not having to reinvent the wheel every time, as well as especially for smaller schools that don't have a big budget and may not have a large administration. So, you're pulling people out of the classroom to do it, and this way you wouldn't have to. So I love that idea. I'm going to be looking into that for our school. The other thing that I've been hearing a lot about in some of my not really education related groups on Facebook or whatever is a return from some, we started really having the joy of using distance learning and all of that. So a lot of tests online, but I've been hearing a lot of universities are wanting to go back to, or some professors are wanting to go back to handwritten tests in classrooms versus any sort of virtual or anything like that. Have you been hearing a trend towards that? Do you think that will happen because of chat?
So I'm really glad you brought that up. And I need to make a slide that sort of depicts this timeline that I'm going to describe. So you're going to see my hands pretending to be a timeline right now. When ChatGPT first came out back in November of 22, I would say about the first 7 months or so after its release, all I heard from school districts was, we got to block it. We got to block it. We got to block it. It's going to help kids cheat. They're just going to plagiarize and, they're going to take the short path. They're never going to learn anything, yada, yada, yada. And I'm that's not wrong. They did cheat. They did plagiarize. They did use it recklessly and carelessly. And it didn't go away, right? So it's this tool that is really, frankly, and this was one of the conversations that one of the hard conversations I've had to have with a lot of K-12s. When you attempt to block Gen AI on your district server, first of all, that's futile. It's laughable. It can't, because it's in everything now, right? It's in Google. You can't Google without using Gen AI, right? So that's silly, even though it's well intended. Like, the reason they were trying to block it was really twofold from what I've gathered. One was to cut down on the potential cheating, and two was because of the data security issues that have arisen as a result of the fact that it's pulling data from everything anybody enters into it. So a teacher inadvertently uploads a roster with social security numbers and all kinds of personal information, and we have a big crisis on our hands, and it was a hot, big accident, right? So the efforts to block are not misguided, but they are futile. All right. So if we can't block it, one of the things that I've seen really actually out of the higher ed population more than I have seen this in K-12 just yet is, and actually I've seen it in both, but some of the key examples that I can think of came from higher education professors who were kind of like, okay, it's going to be here. And you're like 2 years away from a career, whatever that chosen path is. You better learn how to use it well and don't screw up. Like, don't cut and paste a hallucination. Like, there's a case where a lawyer used ChatGPT to write their brief and it made up cases. Well, that lawyer's not a lawyer in that state anymore. Right? So it is now a life skill to be able to be an informed consumer and user of it. Right. And so I can appreciate, as a former adjunct professor and as a former K-12 teacher, I can appreciate the desire to go back to a paper and pencil test to see what they actually know, because we're responsible for the fact that they know things when they leave us. We have to credential them. And if they've faked it all, it's hard for us to sleep at night having accurately credentialed. That's not lost on me.
Right.
However, I also think we have to, there are a lot of ways, in fact, I may spend a little bit more time on this in module 2 than I had planned to, since we're having this conversation and because we have until 8. But there are some tools that ask, one of the things and this is kind of Montessorian, one of the things I learned in my early childhood background was that process is way more important than product, right? I want to see the students thinking in the paper that they turned in. I want to see all the rough drafts, right? Back in 1992, when I started teaching, that meant a stapler and some paper clips, right? With a bunch of stuff that I had to go through. Well, now what that might look like for a university or for a K-12 teacher is for students to turn in the dialogue they had with ChatGPT to get to the informed, high quality piece of work that they submit as their final product. Where did the students add thinking? Like, what kind of prompting did they do to get a good product? And what did the computer contribute? And what fact checking did they do? Right? To me, that is way more of a life skill today than the paper pencil version, even though I can feel their pain and understand why they would feel compelled to go that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel it's a great tool. It's like the same thing with resumes and cover letters and everything. How it to me it would give you a basis, just a jumping off point, but it's still not yet able to fully duplicate human thought, the proper. You can always tell.
Yeah.
Right now, you can almost always tell when something has been verbatim AI, but
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure it's eventually going to get to the point we won't be able to tell, but at least right now we can a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. The thing that, and you're spot on, the thing that's missing, at least in the earlier models of Gen AI production, is like the human voice. And I don't mean the sound, I mean like the personality, right?
Exactly.
You're starting to see more of that shine through, but I'm a little bit arrogant in my own writing. Like, I love to write for a hobby, so I don't use ChatGPT to do much of my writing. Although I think that it's a perfect tool for those who either have to write a mind-numbing number of, like comments on essays or recommendation letters, or, I mean, like those are sort of the sort of things that automating is a gift for. I also have a friend of mine who's a chief technology officer who is dyslexic as can be. And his professional correspondence was really a career challenge for him. One of the smartest human beings I've ever known. And yet he really spent an inordinate amount of time preparing emails that would go to the community or that were sent to the teachers or whatever. And I have seen some of his communications lately, and they are masterful. I know exactly what he's doing, right? He has really just like upped his resume and upped his professional capability because he no longer has to struggle with something that was not reflective of what he, was capable of.
Yeah, let's use it for good, right?
Exactly, exactly. All right, I'm going to skim in the chat really quickly. Think about how calculators shift to advance, more rapid the internet. Yes, speed of change for sure. Enticed you to want to know more. All right, well then I'm done. I've succeeded. I'm teasing, but I'm glad I've enticed you to know more. That's exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to share my screen again. Is this the right one? Let's share it. I think it is. All right. All right.
Suzanne?
Yes, ma'am.
It just occurs to me that we are closing in on 8 o'clock Eastern time. And so I am so sorry to interrupt you. However, I think this slide is a great teaser for us to have you come back.
Oh, my stars.
I apologize. It just occurred to me that we're in different time zones, and you are so engaging and interesting. We could literally listen to you for hours, and I so value your time and expertise this evening that you've got us all on pins and needles and wanting to learn more. So y'all come back. I promise we will invite Suzanne back if she will consent to joining us once again. Suzanne,
I would love that, Lindsay. I am so sorry. I should have calibrated my time zones. ChatGPT just solved that problem for me.
Well, it didn't occur to me until just now that you and I are right now in different time zones. So I apologize.
No worries. Well, now I've teased everybody and they're like, what's going to be in module 301, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, it's like the book. It's like a Netflix episode that you have to come back and watch the next.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So it will give folks time to watch the YouTube, and you and I will connect and schedule something in the future. And Frida says she'll feel cheated if you don't come back to finish all the points. So I promise, Frida, we'll do our very best to get Suzanne back on the calendar. And I appreciate you so much, Suzanne. Next
awesome.
week
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next month, we have Elena Rosemond, one of our Sarasota University faculty members, presenting for us in June on welcoming and affirming classrooms. And Heather White, another faculty member, will be presenting in July. So, Suzanne, perhaps we can get you onto our schedule in August if you can squeeze us in. But for those of you in the audience, I just want to remind you that we do have our bachelor's completion program. We are accepting enrollment. Our next semester begins June 26th. So we are taking applications now. Open enrollment is open now for our June 26th session. And we are so excited to announce our partnership with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. Again, thank you all for being here. And Suzanne, thank you. You've left us all. This is a cliffhanger. So I see lots of folks thanking you for your time and expertise this evening, Suzanne. So thank you so much. And y'all, if anyone has questions about how to contact Suzanne, please feel free to reach out to me or to Ellen at info@sarasotauniversity.edu. If you would like any other information about enrollment, please use the same information email at info@sarasotauniversity.edu. Ellen has also dropped in her cell phone number, so feel free to call or email. And again, thank you everyone for your time and attention this evening. Oh, and Suzanne has included her contact information in the chat as well. So if you'd like to reach out to her directly, please find that information in the chat. So I'll stay on for just another minute or two. And again, Suzanne, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you in August.
Thank you so much. It was nice to meet you guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Stay safe out there.